Well, welcome to Christian Answers. This is Pastor Jeff Short, Bible teacher and cultural analyst, and today we're going to be talking about one of the most neglected truths in the Bible that is really relevant for today, and that is one of the most neglected truths that are not taught very often in churches and Christian circles, and that is roles and jobs within marriage. And we're going to be using this Dennis Rainey's book, Preparing for Marriage. And this is a book that I just recently found on a used bookshelf, and I bought it because I recognized that this is a book that was used for many years, probably many decades, by Dennis Rainey and Family Life Today in their famous couples marriage preparation conferences that were held all over the country for, I think, in the 90s and in the early 2000s. I'm not even sure if they're still holding these marriage preparation councils, conferences. They would start on a Friday and go through Saturday, and the couples would come into a big conference room and they would learn all about preparing for marriage. And this was really popular, especially in the 90s and 2000s, early 2000s. And one of the truths that is covered in this marriage preparation book is roles and responsibilities within the marriage. Now, this is not a very popular topic today, especially with the widespread acceptance of feminist assumptions and presuppositions. Roles within a marriage are seen today as patriarchal rules that were imposed on women, and they are rejected by most feminists, and especially at the university and college level. Women are taught to not be bound by any kind of man-made rules or roles or responsibilities that the traditional marriage would put on them. And they're supposed to be free to make up their own rules or make up their own vows. If they choose to get married, most today don't even choose to get married. They just live together. And again, that is a freedom that feminism has brought into culture. They claim it's a freedom that you don't actually have to get married today. You just live together and you make up your own rules and responsibilities, and you can also leave that relationship and start a new relationship, and so on and so forth. So you have the situation today where, probably 50% of all marriages of people who actually do take the time and effort and commitment to actually promise themselves to another person, among those, 50% of those fail. And then the second marriages, the statistics are more generally speaking about 60% of those second marriages fail. And then the third marriages, if people bother to get married at all, again, 70% fail, and so on and so forth. It just gets worse as the marriages go further. But we are living in a time where the basic institution of marriage and family has pretty much collapsed. It's fallen apart. Most children today spend at least some of their time in their childhood without a father in the home. So it's just mom raising her children alone. And this is even worse in urban situations, in inner cities, where it's almost 80-90% of kids don't have their father in the home. And most of those kids never did have a intact family to begin with. Some of them did, but many of them don't. So marriage and family in the Western world, especially, have basically collapsed. And it's chaotic, it's anarchy, it's basically disorganized mess in the whole of modern society. So when you look back at what caused this terrible thing to happen in the West, what was it that has brought down the pillar of society, which is family? What is it that has messed up so much lately? And that is marriages. A lot of times they don't know, the members of the marriage do not know their role or their responsibility, and the vision for even just basic assumptions that the traditional biblical family held, they're not even there. So it's great to see that there are still publications out that actually talk and teach about the roles and responsibility of the man and the woman in a marriage. And we're not even going to talk about the utter confusion and chaos the so-called Obergefell decision caused, the so-called gay marriage by the Supreme Court, same-sex marriage. That is totally off the charts as far as madness and chaos and foolishness. And that is just leading to further dissolution of marriage. When you start watering it down to not even mean the basic categories of man and a woman. So we won't get into that because that's a whole other topic, and I've talked a lot about that before, the chaos that has brought. But let's talk about today one of the most neglected truths that you don't hear in churches, and that is the roles and responsibilities of women and men in their marriage. And this book by Family Life Today, Dennis Rainey, actually talks about something that you never hear in churches today. If you were to go, for example, on the internet, and all of these churches now have their services online. So you can go and listen to pretty much any pastor or preacher in the United States on the internet. And they have it all archived, and they've all recorded their sermons from the Sunday morning. And you can go online. If you go through all those, and I don't advise trying to because there are just too many, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of sermons. If you can just imagine all of the churches in this country and all of those sermons are on videotape and put on YouTube, and every Sunday after Sunday, they're on the internet. But if I would surmise if you go through all of those sermons, you will find that very, 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 very few times will you ever hear about definite, clear-cut roles within marriage that a man has for his duties as a husband, and clear-cut roles and duties and responsibilities that a woman has as her responsibility as a wife. You will not hear that teaching. Not very much, at least. Because if you look at some of the bigger churches, like the Willow Creek Church, probably the most influential church in the country, at least it was for decades and decades, with Bill Hybels, Willow Creek Community Church, the Leadership Conference, they will never teach you what the Bible says about the role of women and the role of men. They will change the roles, and they will teach today that the roles and responsibilities in marriage in modern times is basically whatever works for you. That's the bottom line. Because if you go to the Bible, if you go to Scripture, if you go to what God's pattern for marriage is, whether it's 2,000 years ago or today, there are definitely clear-cut roles and responsibilities that men have and clear-cut roles and responsibilities that women have. So let's let me just read a little bit from this marriage manual that we have here by Dennis Rainey in Family Life Today. And one of the headings that this book outlines is God's core role for a husband, servant leadership. So the Bible teaches that the man is the head of the home, that he is responsible. He's the leader of the home. If you go back all the way to Genesis in the early chapters of the Bible, go all the way back, it says that God put man in the garden to work it, to be responsible, cultivate it. That was his role. But then it says that man was not found to be fulfilled or satisfied. He needed a helper, and so God created woman as a helpmate. Okay, she was to assist. She was to help the man fulfill his primary responsibilities. The man is the leader. The man is responsible for the work of the garden and the activities that God assigned at him. But then the woman comes along and helps the man fulfill those God-given responsibilities. That's the outline in the Old Testament. Then we go into the New Testament. We see the same thing. The man is the head of the home. He's supposed to be the leader of the family, leader of the marriage, and that is his distinct role. And then it talks about a core response to a wife, to the husband's role, submission. Now, all kinds of red lights are flashing and all kinds of alarms are going off right now because we live in a feminist culture. We live under feminist presuppositions and presumptions, and we simply don't compute what is being said here because we've been trained under a false and foreign philosophy called feminism. But if you go to the Bible, it teaches explicitly, it teaches clearly. There's no way out of it. It teaches that a wife in a marriage relationship is to submit to the servant leadership of her husband. Clear cut. No ambiguity. That a man's core responsibility in the marriage relationship is leadership. He's to bring leadership, guidance, direction, the overall responsibility of the family's health is in the hands of the man, under God. Just like it was in the Garden of Eden, God gave Adam a responsibility to tend to and care for that garden, paradise, and he needed help. His wife was given to him, Eve, by God, to be his helper, helpmate, assistant, to help him carry out his duties, okay? So the man has the leadership responsibilities. He's the head of the home. He's the head of the marriage. And then the wife's role is to help him, but to be submissive to his leadership, to go along with that leadership, to encourage that leadership, to not give him trouble and resist and rebel against his leadership. And in the Bible, it's even stronger in the words. It says the man is the head of the home, and the wife is to submit to the headship of the male. The wife is to submit to the headship of the husband. Very clear. But again, you will not hear this taught in churches in this country because of feminism. And the pastors know that 99% of the congregation has been raised in a modern, secular, feminist culture, and that the presuppositions and assumptions of feminism, if you teach this teaching that is found in the Bible, as far as the structure of marriage, they will rebel, and they will oppose you, and they will get angry, and they will leave angrily, and they will take other people out of the church with them and say, I don't need to hear this. This is bigotry. This is old-fashioned traditionalism. This is not reality. And so they will storm out of the church. And that is what pastors are afraid of, that people just up and leave. And so they don't teach these things. They don't deny them. I mean, there might even be a lot of churches that actually have some kind of statement on marriage somewhere in the file cabinet, but they just don't teach it because it's very unpopular in a feminist culture. But if you look at our culture and you look at the state of marriages today and you look at the state of families today and how miserable they are and how half of all marriages end in divorce and how people are giving up on marriage and having a depression and pessimism toward long-lasting marriage, and they're not even bothering to marry because they're saying, hey, why bother to marry if it's going to end up in divorce? Let's just live together. And so that even adds to the problems, because if you live together, a man and a woman live together, they haven't even promised each other to be faithful through goodness and through good times and hard times, rich or for poor, till death do us part. They haven't even made those promises. They're understanding now, if you live together without the benefit of marriage and the covenant of marriage, the understanding of that is that, well, we will stay together until we feel like we don't want to anymore, or that one of us feels like we don't want to anymore. And even if there are kids involved, we'll still separate and go our separate ways. And we'll just figure out what happens to the kids on the fly. We don't know what's going to happen to the kids. Maybe they'll stay with the parent. Maybe they'll stay with the man. Maybe they'll stay with the woman. Who knows? Or maybe they'll stay with grandma and grandpa. Or who knows? Maybe they'll stay in some friends or relatives' home. Who knows? It's chaos. And it's even bigger chaos in the big cities. New York City, LA, Chicago. You go in there and you will hardly find a house that has an intact family in it, because it's all chaos, all mixed up, all messed up. And consequently, kids aren't raised right. So how come there are so many juvenile delinquents today? How come there are so many street gangs in Chicago? Kids killing kids, young teenagers committing crimes. And how come all of this chaos in the early years? Well, it's really easy. Because their families are broken up. Because their mom and dad aren't together under the same roof. Because their mom and dad never bothered to even get married, or if they did bother to get married, they're already divorced and on to the second or third relationship. And the kids are drug along into that chaos. So, something needs to happen. We need to go back to the Bible. We need to go back to the basic principles and structures of marriage and stop this feminist foolishness that says basically you can invent your own rules. You can make your own vows and come up with your own understanding of what a relationship is or a marriage. You don't even need the marriage, but if you do, you can invent your own marriage roles. No, that doesn't work. And so God has given us very clear and distinct responsibilities and roles within marriage for men and for women, and they're different. They're not interchangeable. There are a lot of families today that think, well, let's just have it so the man stays home and takes care of the house and raises the small children, and then the woman goes out and goes to her office job and makes the money and brings home the resources to provide for the family. Let's just work it out that way, because after all, maybe the wife went to college and she trained in a field that has high pay, and maybe she can make more money by working in a high-paid management position than the man. So let's have the man stay home and raise the kids, and let's have the man come home and run errands and buy the food. And then when the woman comes home after a long, hard day at the office, the man has the meal prepared and ready and able to serve it, and we all sit down together as a family. That's the modern family philosophy, is that these roles are totally interchangeable. Mom can go out and be the full-time worker. Dad can stay home, take care of the kids, clean the house, cook the food, run the errands, be a homemaker himself. And that'll work out great for some people, they think. No, it cuts across the created order. It cuts across the entire teaching of the Bible. That is not a biblical understanding of marriage, and it's not a biblical structure of marriage. What the biblical structure of marriage is that the man is the head of the home. He is the leader of the family. The wife is to learn how to be a good second in command, and she is to learn how to submit to the leadership of her husband. And we presume she already would have screened out a lot of guys before she decided that this was the one that she was going to marry, because she looked at all these other guys and said, no, those are the men I don't think I could submit to, but this man is one that I would feel really good about supporting and submitting and helping, because I believe in what he's doing. I believe he's got good character, and I have a good feeling about his future, so I want to help him succeed, because when he succeeds, I succeed, and the whole family succeeds. So those are just a couple things. Then it says, a second one, God's core role for a wife is a helper, homemaker. Now, I've already talked about how God brought Eve to Adam as a helpmate. And it also talks about in the New Testament that a woman is supposed to be the keeper of the home. So her domain, you might want to say, or her specialty, will be to build a organized, peaceful, well-managed home environment for the children and for her husband. And the way it's supposed to work is the wife is supposed to be in charge of the domestic chores and responsibilities of the home, and she's supposed to be there, and that is her specialty. And then the man is supposed to go outside of the home. He's supposed to work full-time and bring home the resources for the family, and then the wife takes those resources and uses those resources to buy supplies and food and what it takes to maintain a well managed home. And that's her core responsibility. Again, feminism resists any kind of roles and responsibilities put upon the woman by the Bible or Christian faith, because they don't want to submit to God ultimately, but then they certainly don't want to submit to their husband, because again, that's a matter of pride and ego, and they want to rebel and do their own thing. And what has that gotten society? It's gotten chaos and confusion, broken homes, ruined marriages, almost total social anarchy in our society today. Then the next point here that we see in this marriage preparation handbook, which is totally biblical, is the core response of the husband to the wife's core role is praise and honor. So the man is to encourage his wife, is to praise and honor her, not run her down, not put her down, not criticize her, but to be a loving, helpful man, helping her to do her responsibilities, and she helps him do his responsibilities. And there is harmony, and there is freedom and liberty and blessings in that kind of arrangement. So you go through the Bible and you will find a very clear and definite pattern structure for a marriage. And that is the best way to have a successful marriage. It is not to be experimenting with all kinds of options and extra philosophies that we hear today on Oprah and all of these talk shows and on the internet today, and all of these liberal, feminist, radical theories. You know, we have movements today that want to basically tear down what they call the patriarchy. They want to tear down the traditional marriage structure. They want to tear down all of these roles and responsibilities that the Bible outlines and that the traditional marriage has sort of encapsulated. Not everything in the quote, Leave It to Beaver, Ward Cleaver, June Cleaver marriage was biblical. There's nothing in the Bible that says that a wife has to be locked to her home, that she has to stay in the home like in traditional Muslim countries. The women are supposed to cover themselves in public and not even show their face in public. That is not a biblical idea. There's nothing in the Bible that says a woman cannot show her face. There's nothing in the Bible that says a woman can't leave the home, that can't be out and about. In fact, the Proverbs 31 woman says that there are all kinds of things that women can do. It talks about in Proverbs 31 that there's a woman who is in charge of, in that instance, buying a field. Well, that's a lot of activity that's not just strictly confined to the home. Now, we know from other teachings of the Bible that it wasn't the woman off on her own having her own little project of real estate and buying a field and selling a field and doing all kinds of stuff. She wasn't out and about buying and selling real estate. We know that because that would have taken her far away from her home responsibilities and her homekeeping and homemaking responsibilities, which is her primary calling. But she can do all kinds of other things. So there are traditional family, quote, traditional family, that may have come from, say, around the 40s and 50s during the post-war time that aren't necessarily biblical, but the core basic structure of the family is, yes, biblical, because you have very clear role distinctions between what a woman does and a man does. And when the man and woman go into a marriage and they already know these things, that's when marriages succeed. And when they follow these things. Now, another important aspect is that you have to be a part of a faith community. A faith community that actually reinforces these values. Because, again, the feminism in our culture is so toxic that if you don't have a strong faith church community, Christian, either spiritual family or actual biological family around you that are reinforcing the roles, responsibilities of the Bible, as taught in this book, for example, if you don't have people who are thinking and following these kinds of truths, then you will drift away. You will be watching television, or you'll be on the internet, or you'll listen to radio. You'll be reading books. If you go out to college or university, you will be influenced by feminist theories and feminist practices, and you will be led astray. So you have to be a part of a Christian church community or nuclear family community that, and relatives and friends who are all reinforcing God's plan for marriage. And the plan for marriage as outlined in the Bible, and I know this will cause feminists to pull out their hair, is a basic patriarchal model. I'm sorry if you don't like that word, that's too bad. The basic biblical understanding of marriage, God's revelation to man and woman in a marriage, is the structure of the family and marriage should be basically patriarchal, which means that the man is the head of the home, he's the head of the marriage, he is the leader in the family. That is his God-given responsibility. That's why when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, the first person he came to was Adam. God said, "Adam, where art thou?" Not, "Hey, where are you, Eve?" No, he approached man first and said, "What has happened here in the garden that I put you in charge of?" Because Adam was responsible for not just himself, but his wife also, because they were married. That was a marriage. So a man is ultimately responsible for the welfare and the success of the marriage and family because he's the leader and he is the one who charts the course. Now, the wife's role is supposed to support him in his leadership role. And then the children submit to both the man and the woman. But the basic structure is patriarchal or male-led. And this is a truth that churches need to begin to teach more and more. We need to hear this more and more from sermons. And it needs to be stated very clearly that this is God's will, and we should follow God's will, not man's will. Hope that's been helpful. We'll see you back next week. God bless.